Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Love Notes from Laya. I'm very excited about today's episode because it's going to be a really intimate one. I'm going to be speaking a lot about my background, my learnings, and what brought me here to where I am today. So let's dive in. Today's episode is all about my journey towards neuroscience meets wellness. I've always seen myself as a bridge between the neuroscience world and the wellness world, and I wanted to just take a little bit of time to talk about how I got where I am, my background in neuroscience, what that all means, and how I got into it, as well as how I got into wellness, yoga, energy healing, coaching, and the way in which I bridge both of them. And my thoughts on a lot of these aspects, such as alternative medicine and cacao, as someone with a deep scientific background in neuroscience. So let's dive in. I've got my little flow chart here, so if you see me looking down every now and then, I just want to hit all the different points. So yeah, let's dig in. My background in neuroscience specifically starts all the way back in high school. I was always really interested in biology, in the human body, and the human mind. Didn't really know much about the mind at the time, but the body really intrigued me. I thought I wanted to be a doctor for a while, and I was really interested in how does everything work inside of us, and what's happening when we move? What are the different parts that are related and that are connected to creating a movement or giving us energy? So I always thought that was really interesting, but I wasn't really aware of neuroscience as a field until I got to university. I went to a liberal arts school, and as any kid who I think goes to a liberal arts school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. That was unfathomable. I'd never even really heard about neuroscience. I feel like neuroscience became a bit of a buzzword and something new in the fields very recently. So because I was into biology, I was a bit curious about psychology. I knew that wasn't super my calling, but I still took a couple classes, and then I ended up taking a neuroscience class. And that was a bit of a big aha moment because the first class that I took was actually one on neuroaesthetics. So it was a lot about the neuroscience of art. So why do we react to certain arts and certain art pieces? What happens cellularly and neurally to make us react and embrace and have these emotional reactions to certain art pieces versus photographies or still pieces, oil paintings, abstract art? What is happening in the brain? Anyways, if you're anything like me, you think that's really, really cool. And I started diving into neuroscience, and that was a big curiosity seeker for me. I just noticed that I became really curious about all of these different aspects. And at the same time, I was navigating what I will very openly share as one of the most difficult mental health parts of my life. I was also experiencing a lot of anxiety. I was experiencing a lot of stress, and I was having a very hard time just fitting in, trying to figure out my place in the world, socially, generally navigating some complicated relationships, uncovering some deep traumas, and I would say the anxiety was the biggest part. And I share this because very gracefully and very luckily, I was able to come across a Mindfulness 101 class when I was in high school. And that Mindfulness 101 class was just something fun to take, like an extracurricular that I never really thought much about until I got to college. And when I was navigating all of these different mental health struggles, I started coming back to mindfulness as a way of taming my own thoughts and calming down my body, really starting to ground into the present moment. Anxiety for me manifested a lot as in being very worried about the future, being very anxious about things that I had done in the past, but I wasn't really living in the moment. And so as I was starting to undertake my studies, I was also really in this moment where I really wanted to take care of myself and start to tend to my own mental health through this mindfulness, which then ended up becoming more meditation and different practices of presence to help me really be here and to ease the mind, to ease those worries, and to really allow myself to be here and to be now. And while this was happening on a personal level, I was also taking some deep neuro classes. I was in like functional neuroanatomy, where we were opening up brains, and we were looking at like the different anatomical configurations of different sections of the brain. We were deep diving into what happens in the brain when someone has schizophrenia, what are epigenetics, what is happening inside of our own brain, like chemically, when we experience certain sensations. And I think particularly what always fascinated me most was the anatomy component, like literally taking brain slices, opening them up, and like seeing all the different pathways, like, whoa, information, when I see something, is being sent from this part to this part, and seeing it on a slice of brain, it's just mind-boggling. I find it so amazing that we have this beautiful structure inside of us that allows us to think and to experience and to create and to feel. And yeah, I definitely was going deep down the curiosity and intellectual wormhole of neuro. And then came across time to do my thesis. And as I was kind of in parallel navigating all of this mental health stuff, my own curiosity took me to want to understand more of the neuroscience of meditation. What is happening? I've been doing this practice for 4 years now. I feel such huge benefits within myself for having practiced this. Like, I felt calmer, I felt less anxious, I felt more present, I felt more loving, I felt more kind. All of these different aspects that happen anecdotally through experiencing meditation and mindfulness. But I was really curious about like what's happening inside of my brain when I'm doing this meditation and practicing mindfulness. So that took me down my senior thesis in college, which I was very lucky to do with a supervisor who really let me follow my own curiosity. And so I specifically looked at meditation in its role in helping acute pain. So people came into the lab and I would induce acute pain. In this case, I would make people put their hand in like freezing cold water. And I would see how long you would be able to keep your hand there in that cold water. And I looked at different conditions. So I looked at people who were meditating. How did that change your reaction to pain? Different kinds of meditation, a general distraction meditation versus a meditation to really be present and be there with the pain and hold the pain. And also just people who didn't meditate, and how did that affect their relationship to pain? And this was when my kind of neuro brain and wellness brain started to connect. And I got to really study what was happening inside of the brain when we do these wellness practices that I, as just a human trying to help myself, had felt the benefits from. And that was really what spiked this whole neuroscience meets wellness component. But then I finished college, and like anyone or most people I know, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was lost. Yeah, I don't know. I was 21, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I definitely knew that I was really interested in meditation. I knew that I was really interested in the whole wellness space. I also knew I was interested in science and healthcare. And I just started applying for jobs randomly, anywhere and everywhere I could find one. And my best friend was moving to San Francisco, and I very luckily got a job also in San Francisco at what I would call a consulting adjacent company. And that was a really, really tough point in my life because the work was really difficult, morally, more than the actual work itself. But I was doing a lot of work with Big Pharma. I was deeply involved in... Sorry, my phone notifications went off. I got distracted. I hope that's better now. Anyways, it was a really difficult corporate environment for me. And I think just working corporate, but also not necessarily working in a way that best impacts the world the way that I really wanted to impact the world weighed really heavily on me. And at this point, I started kind of really crumbling and I felt really sad again. I wasn't really sure what my path was, what I was doing, how to kind of move forward. And this was when I started to try to find different ways of taking care of myself. I started working with a health coach who was the one who inspired my own journey towards health coaching. So shout out to Nati for being a wonderful coach. And she was the one who really kind of started guiding me and nudging me towards the world of yoga. As I mentioned, I always really liked meditation, and meditation was something I felt really comfortable with. I've always really enjoyed sitting in stillness and feel really comfortable with that stillness. But the beauty of yoga was that it was meditation, but with movement. And I hadn't ever really tried yoga, surprisingly. So that was when I started getting into yoga as a way of continuing to evolve into my own health, taking care of myself while navigating a really difficult corporate space that I knew wasn't for me, but I was 21, 22. What was I supposed to know? Just trying my best. So started really building all of these habits around me to really take care of myself. At this time, I also started making a lot of art and trying to express myself. I felt like I couldn't really express myself in my own work. So my art became my way of taking all of these visions and ideas and things that I wanted to make and actually putting them out there in the world. So I started making a lot of art, which was very new for me and also very fun, a way for me to get to know much more about myself, my creativity, the things that live inside of my own mind. But at the same time, just was deeply unhappy with that job. So I was trying to figure out what to do next. And very luckily, my best friend at the time, and still to this day, helped me find a new job at a mental health startup. And that was an amazing opportunity. I think a big part of why I got that job was based off of my experience in researching meditation and my background in neuroscience, but this time I was working as a mental health care counselor. So I was working directly with clients and people who had anxiety, depression, insomnia, very clinical cases, and I was helping support them through the different medication management, using different tools to help them ease their symptoms and take care and nourish themselves. And this was where the meditation research came back, because I understood so much about what was happening inside of our brains when we meditate, I was able to really educate a lot of the people who I was working with at the time to say, hey, like, I'm not just telling you to meditate because it's going to make you feel less stressed or you will be more present. I'm like, here's what's actually happening inside of your brain that's making you feel this way. And I really saw the difference in how much, when people understood what the science was and what was happening inside of their brain, how much more likely they were to actually enact those changes and to actually set aside those 5 minutes to practice mindfulness, to start meditation in a very easy and comfortable way. But because they understood what could happen and the fact that it wasn't just this anecdotal, like, meditate, it'll make you feel better. It was like, no, meditate, because your brain is literally going to change and it's going to make you feel so much better. People were actually doing it and understanding the reasons behind why they were taking the time to build these habits and incorporate this in. So that was very exciting for me, and I loved it. I enjoyed it so much. It was a big highlight of my role there. But at the same time, it was an absolutely exhausting role. I was seeing like 12 to 15 clients a day. I felt a bit over my head when it came to taking care of clinical populations, and my background was in neuroscience, not necessarily in psychology or in like a therapeutic relationship. So that made me feel a little bit like, I kind of come from this neuro-y background, not super sure I really want to work with like very clinical cases. And it was also, I was just finding it really difficult to cope helping people who were really distraught and really needed a lot of support and were coming to me. And that was when I was very lucky to get my own therapist. And also because I really felt like I needed a lot of help and healing at this time, I started really looking into energy healing. This was probably part influence of also living in San Francisco, also part influence of the people that I had around me, but I started getting really deeply into Reiki. I did my Reiki level 1 and level 2 certification, and this was also just as a way of like tending to myself. I was starting to get to the verge of burnout here, and I could really feel myself getting exhausted, living to work and working way too many hours in the day than a human should. And yeah, I was feeling depleted. I had no energy left to really do a lot of creative projects. So Reiki, energy healing. I did like an energy healing 101 course where we started learning about like the chakras and the colors and how to like clear energy, and doing like body scans to understand how energy could be stuck and how to move and flow through energy. And at this point, I didn't really care about the science. I just wanted help, and I wanted support in taking care of myself when I was taking care of other people. And it definitely really supported me in that time, but it couldn't have stopped the burnout that eventually happened after really overworking myself and putting myself in positions where it was a bit too much stress and intensity for me to handle at the time, given the education that I had, given the experience that I had, and the amount of work that I had to do. So then I took a break. I ended up quitting my job and leaving San Francisco and telling myself I needed to really recover from a really deep and intense burnout. And the first 3 months of that burnout, I spent sleeping. I went back home to stay with my parents, and I remember just sleeping 12, 13, 14 hours a day. I'd spend the whole day sleeping. I was exhausted, catching up on sleep. And if you've ever experienced a burnout, you can probably relate to these first few months where you are just so tired and you are just sleeping. I was just sleeping and reading and sleeping and reading. And yeah, I really felt a bit this kind of like lost, what did I want to do? I knew that I really enjoyed when I was working with clients, really educating them about the neuroscience of meditation and mindfulness. And so I was kind of having this little nudge, this voice in the back of my head being like, go back to school and learn more about the neuroscience of this. If you really enjoyed teaching people about what was happening inside of their brain when they were doing these practices, why not learn more about that and actually get to educate on a bigger level and also contribute to the research that's happening around this? So I started following a bit of that nudge to say, okay, maybe I'll apply to grad schools and look at different neuroscience programs out there and see what's happening. So I started looking at a bunch of different programs, but I knew that I still needed a break. I was still in that burnout recovery mode. And yeah, I took a lot of time to reflect during those months where I was really trying to think about what is my direction? What is my purpose? I've tried this corporate thing. It's not my thing. I've tried the kind of startup thing like that, but it burnt me out. Where do I really want to go, and how do I really want to move forward? And I was really reflecting on my experience with a health coach to say, hey, maybe that's a little nudge. Maybe I can also work with people, but not in the deep depths of the mental health space and those clinical populations, but rather people who just really want and need support in building better habits, finding a life of joy and of ease, and a place where they really feel fulfilled in themselves and in the life that they are living, in their relationships, in their health, both physical and mental, in the way in which they live their life, in the way in which they show up, and the way in which they express themselves creatively. And so that was when I decided I would do my health coaching certification. So that kind of gap year that ended up being between when I quit my job to when I started my master's degree, I said, I'll do the coaching certification. And I had saved up enough money to be able to go traveling. I knew that having something to ground me while I was traveling would be really good and healthy and helpful for me. So I signed up for IAN's health coaching certification, which was 1 year, and I followed that for that whole year while I started traveling and really searching for my next move and what my next purpose would be. At the same time, I was also doing a lot of breath coaching. So I was working a lot on your own breath and how we can use pranayama, breathing techniques to really help ease our nervous system, learning a lot about different techniques and really going into depth on teaching. So I did a completely separate certification around that. And the traveling began, and so did the health coaching certification component of this part of my life. And so I went on to traveling, and as I was doing so, I started in Thailand with a deep friend of mine who we then ended up co-creating the Women's Collective, which is a conversational card game to get to know ourselves and our own bodies more. So it goes through different topics such as anatomy and health, sexuality, pleasure, self-love, all these different aspects of being in our bodies, and how do we actually get to know about ourselves, our fertility, our menstrual cycle, our pleasure, the clitoris, like all these parts of ourselves that no one really taught us. I kind of started falling down the rabbit hole of women's health at this time. Side note, but one of the things I also really did in college was focus a lot on women's studies. So this is where it kind of all comes full circle, and maybe I'll talk more about that at another time. But this episode is mostly on the neuroscience part. But I think that when it comes to wellness, learning about women's health and really diving into education and supporting women and getting to know about themselves and their bodies was also a really big part of the piece, and something I was really working on when I was in this traveling part of my journey. So started the Women's Collective during this time, which was a beautiful way of continuing to explore and learn more about myself. I did a lot of the research behind it and to really understand a lot of what's happening within women's bodies, hormones, anatomy, all of these beautiful aspects that are just heavily under-researched, and we must continue to fight for because we deserve to know more about our own bodies and how they work. And my travels kind of kept going. That project kept going underway. I kept continuing with my health coaching. And that was when I arrived into Mexico. And I had just come from Brazil, where I was there for Carnaval and had a lot of fun in Brazil. That is a good time in its own. And then I landed in Mexico and I really needed to take care of my health. Brazil was the epitome of hedonism. It was so much fun and there was so much pleasure and so much just indulgence in life. But I was also incredibly unhealthy. I was drinking a lot. I was not eating well. I was not exercising. So I got to Mexico and I was like, I need to take care of my health. And of course, when you're traveling, if you've ever done an extensive travel, you know how hard it can be to actually really eat well and take care, go to the gym, like work out. All of these things were not happening. So I was like, I must book a retreat. So I booked a yoga retreat, which was incredible and definitely what I needed. It was like vegan meals, 3 yoga classes a day. And I went to this really open-minded. I kept my yoga practice, but nothing kind of too deep at the time. But when I was at this retreat, I took a class from a beautiful teacher called Carly, who absolutely blew me away. It was the best yoga class I have ever taken in my life. To this day, I still think about that class, and I was like, it revolutionized the way that I thought about yoga and how I practiced it. And it was the perfect balance between movement, but also stillness and mindfulness and going into a posture, but using meditation in a posture. So how can we use our mind to really deepen how we feel in a physical posture that is complicated and difficult, but using the mind to help us get through that. And when I took this class, I remember I went to speak to her right afterwards and I was like, who are you? Where did you learn this? Because I must go and learn from wherever you learned yoga, because this is exactly the kind of practice that I want to be doing and I want to be eventually potentially teaching and practicing. Like, this is a practice that really spoke to me and my love of the mind and stilling the mind, but also combining it with physical exercise and with movement. And yeah, dear Carly was a yoga teacher trainer, and I ended up following her to Costa Rica, where I ended up doing my yoga teacher training, my 200 hours in Hatha and in Vinyasa. And yeah, that was a little rabbit hole, unexpected little rabbit hole in its own, but really opened up my eyes to the world of yoga and the way in which I could also continue space holding for people. When I went down into the yoga teacher training, that was my first time also experiencing a cacao ceremony, which if we've had conversations the past few years, you may know that cacao is a plant that I have been very deeply connecting with, especially the past few years when it comes to opening up the heart, really getting in touch with this loving energy inside of me. I have been working very hard to really show up into the world in a very open way, in a very loving way, in a very caring way. And I believe that cacao really has had a deep impact in helping me get there. And yeah, it was a really incredible experience, that whole year of travel, where I really got to try out all of these different medicines and ways of healing and being in the body and taking care of yourself that really helped me recover from that burnout that I was experiencing, but also really kind of completely opened up this new path of like purpose for me to say, okay, how can we use all of these things that are actually really helping us, that aren't like take the next pill or do this or do that, but rather like getting in tune with our own body, getting back to the things that like ancestrally really supported us and helped us. And how can we just get in tune with the quiet inside of us to really lead and move from a place of clarity and a place of joy and a place where we fulfillment in our own lives. And yeah, I finished my coaching certification right as I came back to Amsterdam as well. And I moved to Amsterdam, and that was when I started my master's in brain and cognitive sciences with the focus on cognitive neuroscience, which was always my little nerdy moment. So it was a really beautiful circular moment because I felt like I came from this very neuro background, started really diving into the wellness space, like deep dive into wellness through that year of burnout, and then came back into the science. But I came back into the science with this whole repertoire of experience in the well-being and wellness space that allowed me to then start to connect the two. And when I arrived into this master's program, I was really driven to say, I really want to be that bridge between wellness and science. I feel like specifically within deep science, it's really difficult to understand the lingo and to read the papers and to actually understand what's happening. And yeah, to understand science, you already have to have such a high degree of education just because of how inaccessible reading papers is. And all of these wellness practices, like there is a lot of research around it, but we don't really know how to communicate that to people. Or yeah, I believe that there's still a big lag between like the scientists and the researchers and the people who are doing these practices and want to learn about it. So I really wanted to be that bridge. I wanted to add to research, and I wanted to also keep showing up as a leader and as a space holder and as a coach and a mentor for people, but in a very scientifically informed way. And yeah, really dived into my studies at this time. My first research project that I did, which was really in depth, was all around breath work. And I looked at misophonia, which is extreme aversion to sounds. And so we were looking at how a breath work intervention could help ease people's experiences and reactions to really intense sounds, like nails scratching on a chalkboard, and people chewing on trains. So yeah, talking more about research can always happen more, but that's a little simplification of what that research was. And it was very empowering for me as a space holder because I was able to lead that breath work. Being a breath coach, being a yoga teacher, I felt like I had the education to actually be able to say, hey, let me look at the research. Let's see what kind of breathwork interventions they've done. And I actually know how to support and teach people about these interventions to then do them in a study, in a research setting and in a research capacity. So that was really interesting. I was also learning a lot about different like neuroimaging techniques. So how can we look at the brain? Are we looking at different like brain waves, anatomy, all these different ways of measuring brain activity, which are the ways that are used in research. So to really help me understand what is happening in research and how we can study different things inside of the brain. I was also really interested in learning more about like psychedelics and experiences of awe, experiences of like mystical experiences and things that change your outlook on life. So I also did some research on how psychedelics can really change that experience and life outlook and give you a more positive life outlook. So that was all super incredible, and just mind expanding. And at the same time, I was, launching the Women's Collective card game, co-creating and then launching the Queer Collective card game, which then kind of became the company of the Self Plus Collective, doing the TEDx Amsterdam Impact Program. So I was balancing a lot together in this kind of wellness sphere through hosting these workshops, starting to teach yoga classes as well to my own community, and also really diving into this research. And as I was especially diving into all of the women's collective components and really learning about women's health, I wanted to also deepen my own understanding of the menstrual cycle. And when I was in my burnout year and like my gap year where I was kind of traveling, I also used that time because I was learning so much about fertility awareness, menstrual cycles, the 4 phases, like what is happening, hormones, all of these things. I was like, I must come off birth control. I want to get to know my own body off of birth control. I was on birth control since I was 12, or 13. I was so young. So how can I get to know my own body without it. I had never experienced that as an adult. So I came off of that. And as I did, I read a lot about finding kind of hormonal balances again after coming off of the pill. It took me a long time, about a year, for me to really refine my own cycle and find regularity in that. As I was doing so, I took the Cycle Blueprint from the Cyclical Coach, her course and like group container, where I really got to learn a lot more about it. I also just started diving down a lot of little rabbit holes around that, and also looking into the research of it. And that research was kind of what then took me to the next part of my research career, which was diving much more into the menstrual cycle. And for my master's, I had to do 2 different research projects. So the first one I had done on the breath work, and the second one was when I kind of really started to say, you know what, I did the kind of breathwork stuff. I'd like to dive into something a bit different. And I really want to learn more about bodies, people, accessibility to healthcare, making this research for all bodies much more welcoming and open. And first, I really wanted to dive into the menstrual cycle, so I found a menstrual cycle researcher, and I went to speak to her. And yeah, she told me at that point she was working on a different research project on looking at barriers for access to treatment for people with alcohol use disorder who are cisgender, cis women, cis men, but also transgender individuals in the Netherlands. So that was also just like a huge yes, full body yes moment, because as a queer person, I also just wanted to add to the research on treatment, access to treatment, and make research and treatment accessible for all bodies and all gender expressions. So that was a beautiful opportunity that ended up happening, and I dived deep into a lot of research around treatment access, and we got to do a lot of interviews with people directly around understanding like what their barriers to treatment were for different genders. So specifically for like cis women, for cis men, for trans people, what is stopping you from reaching out to care? And yeah, that was deeply fulfilling work and stuff that I was very lucky and feel very grateful and to have published. And after that, we even got a grant to keep working on that. So I kind of kept studying that on the side as we continued on with the research. And then, yeah, the final project came around, which was my literature thesis. And that was when I said, you know, I still had that little nudge of, I want to learn more about the menstrual cycle. So can we kind of go back to that and allow me to finish and kind of learn a bit more on that aspect? So then I went back to the menstrual cycle, kept it kind of around alcohol use, because at that point I was slowly learning more and becoming an expert in its own way around it. So dived deep into substances and the menstrual cycle, and that was when I got to really explore and learn about all these different aspects related to neuroscience, the brain, our menstrual cycle, like what is happening hormonally, what is happening inside our own minds and in our own brains chemically, anatomically, that is changing as we experience all of these different phases of our cycle, if you are in a menstruating body. And yeah, that was a bit of how my research ended. And from there, once my master's finished, which was around April, May, I knew at that time, and I started kind of preparing before the master's ended, that I wanted to get back to helping people. I really wanted to get back to being with people one-on-one, going back to my mental health startup experience working as a care counselor and working one-on-one with people and really being able to support them, to educate and to be there and to help uplift them and to help create changes inside their own life to support themselves, their own minds, their own bodies, their purpose, their pleasures, their empowerment. And yeah, I knew that I really wanted to weave back all of these different aspects. So how can I bring back all of these aspects of neuroscience into this wellness. And I see it kind of like a weaving together all of these. And as I share my story and all of my different experiences, maybe you hear it like that too. A lot of these aspects around neuroscience and wellness have been flowing in tandem and moving together side by side. One does not exist without the other, and one comes with the other. And that is so much of what I'm doing now. And now that my studies are finished, still working on a little bit of research on the side, but my main focus right now is to really support people, but to support people from the lens of neuroscience and really help them come to a state of well-being in a way that really feels in tune with what feels right for them. And having been someone who has navigated this whole wellness space, I'm sure there's so much more for me to experience as well, and I will continue to do so. But I know anecdotally how all of these different energy modalities and spaces can feel and how much they can support us. But I also understand the science behind a lot of these and what is actually happening inside of our brain when we actually take the time to sit in stillness, to meditate, to be present, to be mindful. And yeah, that is where all of these new offerings have now started to kind of pour out of me. And right now I am, a joy and well-being coach, which gives me the most joy ever, because what a beautiful purpose to just help people find more joy in their lives. And we've all been put on this earth to experience, to be, and I don't believe that it's like we're supposed to suffer. We're supposed to enjoy this. We are living in this beautiful world surrounded by these plants, these candles, these blank pieces of paper, these teas, these art pieces. Everything around us is amazing. And you only get to experience this once. Why did we get stuck in this place of suffering? And how can we change the way that we think about life to make it one of joy? One that's full of awe, one that makes us feel alive, one that makes us feel so good and so lucky and so grateful and so just in pleasure of the experiences that we get to have. So that's a lot of the space holding that I do right now. And now I work one-on-one with clients. So if you want to work one-on-one with me, I have my program called Joyful Expansion, where I really get to deep dive into all of these different modalities that I've been speaking about, from mindfulness and meditation to gratitude to the menstrual cycle, if you're someone who menstruates, to habit creation. How do we really step into ourselves, into our purpose, into a life really full of joy? And doing so in a way that is research and science informed, but also honest and real to you and what works to you, what works for you, what makes you really be able to step into your own joy in whatever way that looks like. And if you just want to try it out for a one-time session, I also have a one-time 2.5-hour session called Joyful Awakening, where we really start to get to awaken all of these different aspects that bring us joy. I think all of us have joy innately inside of us, but sometimes it's about reigniting it, reawakening it. So in that session, we really take the time to awaken back into joy and realign ourselves back into our joy by using all of these different modalities and my 3 pillars that I like to use in all of my offerings, which are presence, pleasure, and power. So yeah, that's a bit about why my tagline is Neuroscience Meets Wellness. I hope to keep serving as the bridge. I know that my life purpose will continue to be a bridge between both of them. And I just feel really lucky to have this platform and to be able to support people and to be able to be a translator and to be able to be a space holder and to be an educator. And yeah, I hope that you'll come and ride along this journey with me. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have questions, send me a message, a DM on Instagram, an email, whatever feels good for you. And I'm sending you the biggest hug ever. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you here again soon. Mwah.